Trying to do stuff can be hard because it doesn't always work out. Well, I'm interested in anyone trying to make themselves or the world a better place. So join me, Chris Wright, as we explore people just simply trying to do interesting stuff. And hey, hopefully the next time you try to do something, it's a little more likely to happen. All right, now it's time to try the podcast. Yeah, that works. Welcome back to another episode of Try the Podcast. Sorry, I had to do that. So here it is, Sunday, January of 2019, and I'm really excited about the person you're about to hear from today. Her name is Sage B. Hobbs, and what's unique about the conversation that I had with Sage is that she's one of the first people I've interviewed who I didn't really know prior. I knew a little bit about her, a bit of secondhand knowledge from my wife, Natasha, but otherwise, I've never really met Sage other than having, a polite kind of, hey, how are you conversation here or there. I think I've shook her hand maybe once or twice. But once I started hearing about Sage's story, it really resonated with me. And I thought it'd be such a great fit for, Try the Podcast. Essentially, Sage has tried to do a number of different things. And not only has she tried to do them, she has done them. She's been tremendously successful. And recently, within the last 4 or 5 years, she's totally gone solo. And what I mean by that is she ditched her 9-to-5, ditched the career that she'd been building and said, you know what? I know what I'm all about. I know what my personal brand is. I have a lot of value to offer to individuals, to organizations, and I'm just going to go at it. And so I was really, really impressed by that. And you'll hear that kind of later in the interview, just what that decision was like for her, how she evaluated it. She'll talk a little bit about having half of your safety net built in, in advance before you, take the plunge into just diving right into it. But it's kind of interesting. I mean, I'm going to read from her site right now, and this is sagebhobbs.com. I would call this a bit of a mission statement. I mean, Sage, you can let me know if it's not your mission statement, and hopefully it will still be cool. But she says on her site, my work is about powerful coaching, training, and mentorship to create connected leadership, engaged organizations, and positive social impact, with lots of fun, curiosity, and encouragement. Having spent about an hour to an hour and a half with Sage, I can say that she definitely embodies all of those characteristics. Something I really admire about Sage is that she's explored so many different vehicles and channels to get the word out. She's an individual career counselor. She'll work with organizations. Then she starts a podcast where she's interviewing all sorts of interesting women that are changing and reshaping the world. It's called Naked Conversations, if you want to check it out. And then, of course, she decided to write a book. So Sage's book is called Naked Communication: Courageously Create the Relationships You Really Want. I'm going to read you just a little bit of the description from Amazon so you can get a sense of where Sage is coming from. You can have relationships you deeply love. Relationships are messy, and yet they're everything. Our happiness and success are directly related to the quality of our relationships. In our busy and hectic world, building and sustaining relationships can get lost in the hustle. While we're often communicating 1,000,000 times a day, we're rarely doing what it takes to actually connect. We're left feeling frustrated, misunderstood, lonely, longing, and unfulfilled. In this book, you'll learn how to ask for what you really want so you're not resentful and exhausted by never getting it. How to find the courage to be your true self so you can connect with people authentically. Ways to solve conflicts confidently so they don't become explosive or quietly destroy your relationship. It goes on. There are a couple of other examples there. So I encourage you to check out Sage's book. But for now, let's see. I jotted down a couple of notes before we just jump to Sage's interview. What was interesting, because Sage has been a podcaster for, 500 times longer than I have, I asked for feedback at the end of my interview, and she gave me a couple of pointers, and I'm going to give them to you right now so that as you listen to this, you can catch me making those mistakes, and you can say, you know what, Chris, you should have asked the question in this, and this way. Okay, so the first one, Sage was like, Chris, you should probably ask more open-ended questions. Rather than saying, did you feel this way? Did you feel that way? A lot of times I was trying to kind of guess how Sage was feeling, but of course I have no idea how she felt because we'd never really met one another. So point taken, Sage. I'm with you. That was helpful. The second thing, she reminded me of the importance of just keeping the conversation to a specific through line. The benefit of interviewing somebody who also is a podcaster is that Sage kept us really on track by reminding me of what she was trying to do at a particular moment. And you're going to hear that throughout her story. All the things that she tried to do, sometimes it worked out really well, sometimes not quite so much. But in the end, she's somebody that's gone solo. She's ditched her 9-to-5 and she's out there making it happen. So I hope that you feel as inspired as I was by this conversation with Sage B. Hobbs. Enjoy. So here I am with Sage Hobbs.
Hi.
Thanks so much for coming in. It's good to see you.
Such a pleasure to do this with you. So fun.
So fun. I typically start episodes by reminding myself what the date is, because otherwise I'll have no idea. So here we are. It's Wednesday, January, the 16th at approximately 1 o'clock. And we're just sitting here at Google. So Sage, how did we meet?
How did we meet? I fell in love with your wife. She was taken, but no. But really that is how we met. I met your lovely wife at a women's leadership event, and we met in the elevator, and she was wondering where the event was. We were trying to find our way to the hotel convention center area, and we just started chatting, and she was just so warm and engaging, and we were basically like, we need to be friends. We spent some time together throughout the weekend, had some good conversations, and when I attended her Try for Charity event, the nonprofit she started at your home, that's the first time I met you.
That's right, in my backyard.
Yeah,
I met a lot of people for the first time in my backyard that day.
Oh my gosh, it was such a cool gathering, and went off without a hitch, and I was like, this is a family that's up to good things. So that's how we met.
Which is amazing. And so, to take it one step further, you do lots of different things, everything from author to speaker to podcaster to writer to personal coach.
Yeah.
Is there anything else to add to that list, or does that?
Oh gosh, right? Isn't there always something? Momming,
mother, yeah, wife.
Being a wife, right? Friend, daughter, individual. So yeah, but that's an overview for sure.
Cool. So where you're at right now is you have this amazing personal brand, and we're on your website here. I want to get this right. sagebhobbs.com, and of course we'll link off to that. But I was interested in just hearing more about your background, like academically speaking.
Yeah.
Where did you get started? What were you passionate about in college? What were your first career like? And then eventually would just like to hear about this transition to having a personal brand, what that means to you.
Sure, yeah. Gosh, it's a lot, right? So honestly, the only thing that has ever really interested me for any period of time are people.
Okay.
It's, human development, human behavior, human potential. Like when people would ask like, well, what do you want to do? Or what do you like? All I could ever come back to was like, the only thing that really interests me is your story, and why are some people resilient and some people defeated, and why are some people happier and some really struggle, and what is that all about? So literally since I was a kid, that was my curiosity. Like there's stories of me as a child that I don't even remember them happening, but we went into McDonald's, and I was maybe like 7 or 8, and there was a young girl sweeping the floor, and apparently I went right up to her and I was like, gosh, you look really tired. This must be hard. And my mom and my mom's friend were like, what?
How could you do that?
Yeah, they just we didn't even notice the girl. You know what I mean? And I was just so I just love people. I love people. Yeah. And so eventually that became a career, right? That became choices I made around, in high school I was involved in various kind of service projects, and I grew up in Philly, and so there was something called the Philadelphia Youth at Risk program, and I was raise money for them, and those were teenagers who lived 20 minutes from where I lived, in a whole nother world from me.
And so when you say people, just their motivations and what kind of drives them, why they're getting up in the morning, those sorts of things?
That, and why do some have opportunities that others don't? How do we treat each other? This idea of shared humanity and connection and community is just it's really my core value and my core desire. I feel we could actually have world peace if you want to get grandiose about it.
Sure, yeah.
If humans could more meaningfully humanize each other's experiences, kind of
connect, and we're in it as part of one greater good rather than just so independently.
Yeah, or that we all have pain, we all have sorrow, we all have grief, we all have joy, we all have pleasure. Mm-hmm. I've been lucky to travel a fair amount, and that's one of the things I feel there's great equalizers of just human experience, but there's great disparity in terms of opportunity and access, right?
Yeah.
So why do we think how we think? How do you have kids from the same circumstances, and some of them manage to find success and others struggle and fail? These questions just have always
Interesting. So just what are all the factors that are going to play into it? Because I come from a pretty homogenous background growing up in Montana, where I didn't know what a BMW logo looked like. It's just we're all kind of the same. And the people that kind of had more money came from doctors and lawyers, but it wasn't like Silicon Valley or like a Philadelphia, just really kind of small town.
Right. Totally different worldview.
Right.
With some really beautiful advantages to that and the way that people knew each other and neighborliness, I would imagine, So I'm lucky that I grew up in a pretty diverse community, and various experiences throughout my life sort of just kept fanning the flame of curiosity around, again, human behaviors. Why do we do what we do? What motivates us for good and what motivates us for harm, So I ended up going to college in West Philly, and so I was right in the heart of the city.
Okay.
And where there was a lot of friction, racial friction, socioeconomic friction between this, the college campus and the neighborhood around the college campus, and it just always was interesting to me. And so
what were you studying? Sorry to interrupt.
Yeah, no. I ended up studying, I did not know what to study. So just anybody listening, around trying, you try things you don't know, and you just make the best choice you can in the moment, and you try and you see, right? So I ended up with a major that I didn't even know existed before I got there, which is called urban studies.
Urban studies, okay.
So it wasn't urban planning. It was kind of intersectional in terms of sociology and development and, anthropology, a little bit all of that together. But basically it allowed me to spend a bunch of time in the community in West Philly doing service-based learning projects, which I found really interesting. And
got it. Was your focus always on more or less America, or was it kind of more of a global view? Or
it was pretty much Western, yeah.
Pretty Western, yeah.
Hemisphere, yeah. Mm-hmm. Pretty focused on our urban cities because they're fascinating. Why do neighborhoods? It all ties back to people. For me, other people sort of took the bent of planning, right? Why do we lay cities out the way we do? Are you going to put in a stadium, and is that going to generate economic growth or whatever? I was much more interested in gentrification and why do we move communities around, again, because it all just came back to me for people. Why do we have such a hard time getting it right with education inside of urban sectors, and what was white flight, and what it was just all, it was super fascinating to me.
That is fascinating because you're right. Somebody builds a town and the town kind of builds organically and it starts to grow, and then folks maybe such as yourselves or others come in and they're okay, what can we implement in order to either solve something or to make things better? Mm-hmm. So if you had your dream job and you had a city and they were going to do whatever you told them to do, what would the ideal kind of city roadmap look like? If you were to redesign Manhattan or Los Angeles or some of these areas?
Oh gosh, I don't know. I think more of it was I didn't really end up going in that direction. It was it's more how it's really hard to redesign. It's easier to try and start something from scratch. That's why people want to make charter schools and things like this, because it's easier to start a new school than it is to reform ones that are entrenched in long-term structural dysfunction, So in terms of our cities here, if you look at the older cities, we're here near Denver. Denver's a newer city, so they've been able in some ways to do more intentional planning. Places like Philadelphia and New York really came up through the Industrial Revolution, and it wasn't always intentional. It was economic driven almost entirely. And so, and it's a complicated question. I think for me, more the interesting part was, and still continues to be the interesting part in the work that I do now, how do we support individuals and organizations and companies and districts, any place where communities exist, to feel like they have a voice, that they can contribute to the places that they live, the places that they work, that we have more representation of leadership. So women's leadership is really important to me. And underrepresented communities, that we have more of them. I mean, some will say we've come so far, and others will say, oh my gosh, we have so far to go. It's, kind of depends where you fall on the pessimistic, optimistic spectrum. And it depends if you're a person of color, or if you're a person of a white male, you know what I mean? You're going to see it differently.
Sure.
You're going to have different experience. So for me, that was the fascinating part in college, which was how do we do this? How do we interact as human beings? And I would say that if I had to come to the heart of it for myself over time, it's been about that I believe that your personal happiness and your professional success, like, so your personal life and your work life are directly related to the quality of your relationships.
Okay, just across the board.
Across the board. I don't care where you're from, who you are, what demographic. Like, we're not meant to function in isolation. Like, we're just not as a human species, like as an animal species. Like, we're a collective. Species, really. So that to me is sort of the driver of like anything I've chosen to do since when I went on to graduate school and the work that I've done. It's like, well, what part can I play in that? How can I support?
Well, that's kind of where I was going. Like, coming out of graduate school and having all these not even opinions, but philosophies on just the way that people interact in the community structure. Like, what did you think your dream job was, or what direction did you start taking your career as you started acting on these issues rather than just kind of conceptualizing them?
Right. Yeah.
Academic sense.
So after I finished my degree, my undergrad degree in urban studies, I went to Africa for 3 months.
Oh, that's cool.
Yeah, and I taught in a rural school in Kenya, and it was like super life-changing for me. And again, like worldview perspective, right? And then I came home, and then something happened that like forever impacted the trajectory of my career choices, which is when I was 23 and I was living in Center City, Philly, and I had my first dream job. This was my first dream job, which is that I got hired through a nonprofit in Philadelphia, the Philadelphia Education Fund, to help them implement a federal grant, which was called Gear Up, Gaining Early Awareness and Readiness for Undergraduate Programs. The fact that I can remember that is amazing, because I can't remember most things.
Yeah, I might have to write that down later.
Oh my gosh.
Say it one more time.
Gaining Early Awareness and Readiness for Undergraduate Programs. And basically it was a large federal grant who was tasked with helping kids in poverty, underrepresented groups go to college or some kind of post-secondary training. And I was in 4 different middle schools, and I was like taking busloads of African-American kids to like prestigious universities on the main line, which were almost all white, and like taking them for tours and lots of different things. But it was really like, I was idealistic. I was like, I can change, like racism, poverty, disparities in urban education. Like, I got this, you know
totally.
what I mean?
I know exactly what it is, so we'll fix it.
Totally. I mean, that's part of trying. Like, I was naive, I was idealistic.
Of course. That's kind of what I love about it, though. You might fail and you might not fail, and I don't know. That's kind of the whole
you got to
point of
try.
this.
You got to get knocked around a little bit and learn. Like, I got schooled, I was like, I had some really incredible mentors who were all older African-American women who were seasoned, and they were kind of like, they was a talking to at one point. This was one of my most humbling experiences in my professional path, which was, they said, I have no idea what they actually said, Chris, but like what I remember of what I felt was, girl, you need to like slow your roll. Like, you are coming in here like you know what's going on, and like you like, I felt like, oh my gosh, I'm being arrogant. Like, who am I
to think I can solve the world's problems?
Yeah, and to think that I even understand the experience of the Black community in urban schools in West Philly, right?
In Philly, yeah.
So I like ate some serious, humble pie, and like apologized and asked them to teach me, and said like, I really want to learn. Like, I'm actually full of ideas and willing to work super hard for you. So that was my first dream job. But what happened was I got cancer. So that derailed me quite a bit in terms of like that idealism, like
totally,
this sense, right? Like I was actually at that dream job, and I felt this small lump above my collarbone, and I was like, that's weird. And like most 23-year-olds who are healthy, I kind of ignored it for a while, like it'll go away, and it didn't. And so I ended up taking a leave of absence from that job and doing chemo and radiation and like processing, fear of mortality.
Oh, of course.
How do you not?
Yeah, and I mean, how did your perspective change from before and after, battling cancer for however long you did?
Yeah.
Like, did you want to immediately run back to kind of what you were doing and pick up where you were at, or did you feel like, you know what, that was great, but now I kind of want to go in this other direction?
I definitely needed to go in another direction. But I've come back around in some ways. You know what I mean? Like this idea of the spiral staircase, where you sort of circle around this idea, but at another higher level every time.
Understanding people and their motivations.
Yeah, totally. And wanting to help, like at its core, like not to save, not to fix, but wanting to like help and empower and support has always been my through line. And it just looks different how it's shown up at different places in my career. Some people take a total departure and they start I have in some ways taken a total departure in the way that it's being done, but like the sense of like my own connection to it has always been that piece. If that makes sense. Yeah.
I mean, if you were to take something, I mean, you mentioned the humble pie story of these like, kind of older, more experienced women kind of telling you, like, this is the way it is. But if you were to take something that really worked well, and you said, you know what, this really worked well for a young group of underrepresented students to feel inspired, to feel empowered, you know, what are some things that I may not have heard of? Because I hear all sorts of different ways to inspire these communities. But I mean, what should everybody be aware of to help folks?
You ask a big question. So I was just messaging with an old student of mine. Eventually I became a school counselor. We can get to that. But I was just messaging with today an old student of mine who's now like, I was in middle school, so it was a long time ago. She's like 25 now. And she messaged me through Facebook. She found me on Facebook. And her husband was there. She was Mexican American. Her husband was deported back to Mexico, and she chose to go with him, having hardly lived there ever in her life. This is obviously a very current, present issue, right? And so she's messaging me about it, and thanking me for our time together when I was her school counselor. But she's also just talking about like, God, it's so hard. Like I said, that's so brave of you. She's like, yeah, and I miss my family a lot, and I just hope one day we'll get to see each other again. And what I was left with in connection to your question is there's like a billion programs, and I don't know the answer in terms of how we solve. There's big structural questions, but on the one-to-one, what has been most effective for me all the way back then when I was doing that first out of college, all the way through when I was a school counselor, and even today when I still have some of these old students that there's a few I meet for lunch and stuff, it's listening. It's like actually listening to the other person in an open-hearted, non-judgmental way, and letting them know you hear them. And I feel like that is kind of what's fundamentally missing from leadership in executive situations, what can be missing oftentimes in educational leadership, what can be missing in our home environments in terms of our children feeling really safe even just in their homes. Like we have like an addiction to being right. And
oh my gosh,
as
I love
humans,
that.
we have an addiction to being right. I'm like not.
And you're really good friends with my wife, right? I just want to bring that back. Okay, great.
So, I mean, I'm not saying that I have cured myself of this affliction, but like we get caught up in like, well, what am I going to say next? And how do I prove my point? And like
go into fix it mode.
Oh my gosh, 100%.
Yeah.
And like, nobody wants that unless you've gotten where they're coming from first. It's just completely ineffective for connection. Like they don't want you to fix it right away. They want you just to be like, oh honey, like we do it all the time with kids. Like they'll fall and hurt themselves and we'll say, oh, you're okay. No, they're not fucking okay. Like they just, their knees bleeding. Like they're going to be okay.
But acknowledge that they actually feel pain.
But in this moment, like, oh honey, ouch. Like that hurt. You know what I mean?
Totally. Yeah, there's a book I just read, a fellow parent of mine recommended it, but it's how to speak to your kids so that they'll listen, and how to listen, so your kids will
best. It's exactly that title. It's a great title.
Right, it's something like that, yeah. But
how to listen so that they'll speak.
But it's the same thing. It's like, if your kid doesn't feel cold and you're yelling at them to put a coat on, like maybe approach it differently. And it's like, oh, of course, if somebody tells me to put a coat on and I'm not cold, like, get out of here.
It's annoying, right? Totally. So I think with young people, if you started at that foundation, or not even just young people, you asked about young people, but it could be women, and if you could be an ally, right? It could be any underrepresented group inside of an organization or a community or a company. Like, listen to what they have to say. Like, if you're actually asking the question for how do we have a more inclusive work environment, how do we have more kids in, my husband's a high school teacher, how do we have more underrepresented students in AP classes? That's like a big issue. Like, why aren't they there? They're obviously intellectually wise. They've got to be a same representation of capability, you know?
Yeah.
So, but we don't stop to listen to the answers. We think we know the answers, and we just kind of move forward with our
because we have all this academic training and we have the program and we're like, we have the solutions and just do,
Totally.
And so, I mean, not to fast forward too much, but you were a counselor for what, 10, 12 years?
Yeah, about 10 years I was a counselor. I did, my first year was, so after I got sick, I decided to move to Colorado.
Oh, really? Just on a whim?
I had one of my best friends from college was living out here. I had worked out here one summer, summer in college, and I really loved it. It was something very grounding and peaceful for me. I'm like a very Northeast Philadelphia, like driven, striving kind of person by nature, and so something about this area was like very peaceful to me. She said, just come out for a year, like just live with me for a year, just like regroup, and that sounded really appealing. So I did, and I like kind of took a pause to sort of recover from being sick and all that came with that. And I like worked in a coffee shop, and I did yoga, and I rode my bike everywhere, and I started volunteering with some youth organizations. And then eventually I decided to get a real professional job, and I worked at a residential treatment center for adjudicated youth, so boys who'd been in the justice system. That was like the most intense year of my professional career in some ways, until I decided to eventually go out to business for my own, and then that was more intense. But like they schooled me. I mean, they just taught me so much. Like I got called all sorts of names. And
yeah, how did it differ from like your preconceived notions about what the experience would be like, and then the reality of what it was once you're a couple weeks into this?
Right, and again, trying, right?
Yeah,
like I first of all loved it. I will say, even though I got called like things that I don't want to say on the podcast.
Of course, yeah, I can imagine.
There were like about 12 to 14 boys living in this home in a community, in a neighborhood, in an actual house that had been converted with all these bedrooms, and I was less naive. So how it changed, right? Like from when I had those first 4 middle schools and then got sick and then went back to this kind of work, I was less naive. Like I knew that I wasn't going to like go in there and save every one of these boys, that they were up against challenges that I understood in a different way, right? And I was still hopeful. I've always maintained hope, Chris. I think this is, if you're going to be somebody who tries things.
I get that from you. Yeah, you have to remain a little bit optimistic.
You just like, you don't try new things if you don't believe, if you have no hope at all. Like,
of course.
You won't try new things, know? So how was it different? I don't know, actually. I mean, it was hard. I think it was as hard as I thought it would be. It was probably a bit harder than I thought it would be. Like, do
you meet just a lot of reluctance from those young boys being like, I don't need your help. I don't want to hear from you. Is it kind of like
reluctance and things I was not really equipped to deal with. I mean, talk about being like, I literally did not yet have a degree in counseling. I eventually, after this, I went and got a master's in counseling psychology, but at that time I did not. And I had a sex offender on my caseload, like that I was responsible for talking to him about not repeating sexual misconduct, like a 17-year-old boy. Mind you, nobody can see me right now, but I'm like barely 5'3", and at the time I was like 24 years old. So I was only like 6 to 7 years older than these guys and tasked with some heavy, heavy stuff that I really didn't know about.
Did you get any support or not really?
Yeah, Dr. Dick Modern was my clinical supervisor, but he wasn't usually there. I mean, he came like, twice a week or something to make sure we were like following our treatment plans. He sat me at the computer, showed me how to write a treatment plan, but then I had to write treatment plans, like actual therapeutic treatment plans. It's actually pretty wild when you think about that. But what I did have, and what you asked in terms of before, is like I had an inherent ability and desire to listen and to champion them and to bring hope to them. Some of them came from very hopeless situations. So always, this is like so interesting when somebody else asks you a question, how it makes you see your own story. Just I'm gonna say, like I'm.
But you've done this 15 to 25,000 times.
No. Haven't you? I've done much more. I've been in your seat, fewer times on this seat, but
that's true.
It makes you see your own through line. Like it was always about connection for me. Like connection goes so far. Like these guys would push against me, but they ultimately really mostly also loved me, like
because they saw the authenticity and then you were able to build trust, I imagine. And
oh my gosh, like the time that I had it. Oh my gosh, Chris.
Yeah, tell me a story. Tell me one of your favorite stories.
Just from Matt, I'm just remembering. Oh my gosh, we had a huge 15 passenger van for this treatment center where I could take them to the grocery store and teach them how to shop on a budget, and sometimes I'd take them to GED classes. And one time they didn't want to go to GED classes. I'm like, this was before I was a mom, but I was basically like momming them, like, we got to get in the car and get to the GED class kind of thing. And finally I wrangled them after they're like swearing and cursing and pissed off. And I get in this van. I hated driving this thing. Again, I'm barely
So you had to drive the van.
I had to drive this van full of boys who were angry and resentful about trying to get their GED. And we're late now, So I go and I put this big van in reverse and I hear, like this. And I'm just like, what? Oh, and I maybe had moved the van 4 feet. Okay. Well, 4 feet isn't a big deal unless the 4 feet is that the bumper of the van has taken out the entire side swipe to your entire vehicle that you parked in the driveway next to the van, your own car. And these boys, like, who had just been so pissed and so rude to me, all of a sudden were like, Miss. They always call me Miss. And I'm like, what? You know, basically, Miss, we're really sorry to tell you this, but like, that's your car.
And it was your own personal car.
Oh, it was my own personal car, and it was my first new car ever.
Yeah.
A red Subaru, very Colorado. And I just was like, I started to like cry, you know, like I was so upset. And they were really kind to me. They're like, you know, in their own way, they were just like, oh, Miss, I'd be so, and they're swearing, but they'd be like, I'd be so pissed too. I mean, God, that sucks. I'm so sorry.
So they could immediately empathize with you.
And they totally offered back to me what I feel like is the gift that if any of us could offer it to each other, which is listening and understanding, getting that other person's point of view, even if it isn't your experience, right? Like, even if you don't agree with them, it doesn't mean you agree, but you just get that that's what they're going
You understand
through.
where they're coming from. It's I see why you feel the way that you feel.
I see why you feel the way that you feel. So that was one of my stories.
I feel like that's just one of those skills that I'm not going to say you're born with it, but you meet a lot of people that don't have it, and then a lot of people that do. And I totally get your point, where the people that do have it, you're like, I instantly relate with you, understand where you're coming from. Like, all of a sudden, a lot of barriers go away, and it's like, oh, that's what you're motivated by.
A lot of barriers go away. You're absolutely right. And then when the barriers go away, you can connect. You can connect human to human, and that, I believe, is the magic. And yes, it is more natural for some than for others, for like any skill, right, or any inclination. But in my work, like, I have found a lot of it is teachable. Like, it is teachable. People can read books. They can get coaching. They can attend trainings and conferences. They can practice with their partners and their friends. If they have some awareness, you have to have awareness first. Like, hey, dude, you don't listen. Like, every time I'm not talking to you personally.
Yeah, I know.
You know, like, anytime I'm talking to you, like, I can sense that all you're doing is waiting for your turn to speak. You're not really present with what I have to say. And people can tell. If you think about any like leader, that I won't turn this on you because I was about to be the host for a second. I forgot.
Oh, you should. You totally should.
But like, if you think about like people who you've worked under, you could probably identify those that you enjoyed working with more. And I would bet that those that you enjoyed working for more, you felt heard by them. You 100%. Felt seen by them. You felt like you could give input.
100%. No, yeah, I did a lot of leadership training with the Boy Scouts in high school, and I remember
very Montana.
But you know, the head of the program, his name was Jack Sherrick, and it was some like senior governor person, somebody high up in politics, was like, what I love about Jack is that every time he talks to you, you feel like he's only speaking to you, and there's nobody else around. And I was like, oh, I want to be like that. Like what a cool skill, you know, for somebody,
an awesome skill
to describe you that way.
And then take it and flip it. The next level of that is that you also feel like when you're in conversation with Jack, you're the only thing he's
thinking about,
hearing, like the listening part, right? Like there's I honestly don't know if there's anything more powerful you can give to somebody. And again, I don't always get this right because I get rushed and I get harried and I get strong opinions, but I don't know there's anything more beautiful than you could give than to honestly sit with somebody and like listen to them. And that's, I think, when I was a counselor before I was a coach, in both as a counselor and as a coach, the magic that can unfold if you can just like be with somebody's experience, even if it's really, so in the counseling role, it was sometimes deeply painful. I mean, horrible trauma, really significant trauma and loss. And I could listen to that. A lot of people struggle to listen to sad stories.
Right.
You know, can you actually still sit in that
I imagine
story?
you go through a lot of training in order to do that really well and compartmentalize it a bit, right?
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
But also just practice.
Right.
You know, like I went to graduate school with a bunch of people who were learning to be counselors, and we went all the way through the program together, and I can tell you which ones graduated, and they really should never have become therapists. And those, they were really there to seek their own healing and their own curiosity, which is fine, but like their listening never developed.
Right. It was a bit too much about them. It sounds like.
So So anyways, yeah, so that's I guess long-winded answer to your question of what my career path has been. It went, so after the residential treatment, then I decided that that place got closed down by the government did
cut funding.
Yep. It'd been around for decades. It was a sad thing. And then I decided that I wanted to go back to graduate school, and
Did you stay in Colorado?
I wasn't sure at that time. That was like the juncture, like another, you talk about those moments in life, right?
Which path to take?
Yeah, at that point I only thought I was going to come to Colorado for a year. At that point, it had been 2. All my family's on the East Coast. At that time they were. I've lured some of them out here now.
There you go.
But I applied to a school in California and a school back east and a school here. And it was kind of the moment where I decided to stay.
That's cool.
So,
I didn't realize that. So you've been here for quite a while at this point.
I've been here since 2001.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, so quite a while.
That's awesome.
I know.
Okay, so now you have a graduate degree in
counseling psychology and counselor education.
And what did you want to do did you end up doing exactly what you wanted to in those first couple of years?
I chose, when I was in this program, you could have taken like a couples and marriage path, or you could take an agency, working for an agency kind of path, family systems, or schools. That, I think this is an interesting one. You asked how like life changed before and after cancer. I chose schools for a selfish reason and a not selfish reason. One was selfishly, I was like, something shifted inside of me where I knew that I always wanted freedom to like travel, and I wanted like that I could die basically, and I wanted to make sure I always had freedom.
Well, make the most of your time.
So I was like, well, school counseling gives you the sweetest schedule. Like you get paid decently and you get tons of time off. And I was like, heck yeah. I mean, why, at that point I'm like 25. Like, who says no to that, right? Excuse me. And and then the second reason was, so I sort of chose it, like sort of, I put my foot in the water to see if I wanted that path. And then what I got excited about was that in schools, you get a whole cross section of your community versus in private practice, you get who can afford to come to you for the most part. And in agency work, you sometimes only get those who are most in dire need, the most intense cases, because they're like accessing public agency kind of situation.
Oh, right? I see. So I was thinking of agency differently. So agency is a bit more the public sector.
Yes.
Okay.
Right. You're probably thinking of agency like because you're in marketing.
I'm in advertising. Right, exactly. I'm like, which ad agency is operating the marriage counseling?
Right.
Maybe they should be.
Yeah, right. Totally. They should be. It'd be a very good preventative measure. But I got to see like that in public schools, at least, like you get everybody. You sort of get a whole.
Were you talking to like the parents of the students as well? Was that part of the program?
Yes. I mean, you're not supposed to be like ongoingly doing therapeutic work with parents, but I had parents in all the time.
As it pertained to the children,
As it pertained to the children,
sure.
Right. And then sometimes parent evening talks, and I also worked with, like, I also ended up needing to have lots of conversations with my colleagues, my faculty. Like, I didn't know that would be so much the case.
Interesting. So people would come to you, and it was probably just to kind of chat, but then it turned into something a bit more formal,
or they'd come like they were struggling with another colleague, or they were struggling with a particular student, and when they were discussing how they were struggling with that student, then it would also be, well, why is that student triggering you so much?
I see. Then became the whole person.
Right.
Like, now I'm treating the whole person.
This particular child is triggering this particular teacher for a reason.
I see,
what I mean? So it was a very cool path, and I ultimately, halfway through grad school, I met my now husband, and he was in graduate school to be a teacher, so that became this like super sweet thing, because
both of you are in EDU.
Oh my gosh, we're like having all this time and freedom, right?
You get all July and August off permanently.
Yeah, I know, exactly. So I did that for I believe I was in the schools for 9 years, and I had 2 kids in that time. And after I had my second kid, this is like where the big try, the big leap.
I know. This is why I reached out. I'm like, oh my gosh, Sage, tell me more.
Right. I know. So I was sitting there with the second child on maternity leave, and I was like, okay, that second maternity leave, I was like, oh, I'm not going to kill this little human. I know how to do this, so I can actually like think and breathe, and
Yeah.
And I was really clear I just did not want to go back to school counseling.
And how did you know that so definitively?
Man, it was. It's a great question.
Or it sounds like you thought about it quite a while.
No, I didn't give myself that much space to think about it, honestly, because it was such a good gig. I felt like I should just be happy. This might resonate with some of your listeners. Like,
of course.
I should just be satisfied.
Yeah.
I mean, here you work at Google. Like, there's a lot of
you have to be content.
It's like the pinnacle.
Gosh. How could you possibly be upset?
Right.
100%.
I mean, I was in one of the best districts in our state. I was 7 minutes from my home. It's my actual neighborhood school, and my kids will attend this school if they choose. And I wasn't even yet 40. Like, people don't leave it. They don't leave that kind of pension plan. Who gets a pension plan anymore? You know what I mean?
That's true. Teachers do. I think that's
right.
about it.
Exactly. So it was definitely, I actually hadn't given myself much permission. In reflection, of course, that discontent had been there and it had been brewing. And I'm sure people who are listening to this have, if they've thought about it, they'll notice that they've had it too.
It's probably like a tug and a pull. And this week I feel this way. Yeah, for sure.
Right. But I was sitting there and I had some space to really be with it. And how I knew for sure was that the anticipation time of going back, I was like, I felt it in my body. Like, on a visceral level, I was like, I do not want to do this. And I always say, let me be clear, it's not that I didn't want to work, because I actually am like completely not cut out to be a full-time stay-at-home mom. There's not like one genetic component of my makeup that would make me good at that.
Fair. Me neither.
But I knew that I wasn't going to do this 30-year, only this thing.
What was the thing that bothered you? I shouldn't say bothered you, but that visceral reaction, did you kind of think of yourself sitting down with the students, going through the same conversations with them, kind of the repetitiveness of it, or did you feel like you could accomplish more if you were doing something else? Or was it a bureaucracy thing of being stuck in an institution? Maybe a combination of all, I don't know.
All of that.
Yeah.
It was never the sitting down directly with the kids. That was always my favorite part.
It sounds like that's kind of your passion.
Yeah, I love sitting down now directly with adults. Like, I love conversations, coaching conversations for like future possibility. That's like my jam. Like, oh, you want me to help you figure out that you are way more awesome than you think you are? Yeah. The way to help you figure out that you can survive hard things and you can do hard things, on it.
Yeah.
You want me to help you like open up your worldview and see what else you could create for yourself? And you're like, okay, like that was always my jam. But the structures, it's very hard to affect change inside of bureaucratic systems. Like, it's hard, and there are ways that things are done inside of schools or companies. And I was like always wanting to sort of push against that in some way. And I also felt like I couldn't, and this is like not at all a slight to those who are in education or in counseling, because it's like, seriously, it's like some of the most sacred or important work out there. But I didn't feel like with my skill set actually that I could make the impact that I wanted to make doing that forever, that I couldn't have like the scope and breadth that I kind of desired. And I also felt like I wanted to lead in some way more, and I couldn't see a through line there as easily either. Like, I didn't want to be in school administration, and I just couldn't see that I would stay in that same capacity with those same kinds of frustrations around affecting change for like another 20 years,
Absolutely.
It just wasn't for me.
And so this was a good time for you to come back and kind of think of something different, right?
Yeah.
Or just like reevaluate what it was or what direction you wanted to go in. And you ultimately went solo. I don't know, I have a lot of friends that call it all these different things, like going professional or going solo or whatever it is. It's like this leap of the chasm, right? It's like, oh, here I'm kind of protected with pension and with healthcare, and I'm going to jump way over to this scary place where it's just me and there is no kind of safety net. I mean,
totally. And I'm not really a believer in like jump and the net will appear. Like, I think you should weave some of the net.
There you go. Yeah.
Before you jump. And I also, I'm passionate about this equity piece, and I feel like it's very presumptuous, like, to come from a position of safety, security, financial security, privilege, and say, jump and leap and the net will appear to somebody who maybe doesn't come from that background, and they're like, screw you, my mom or dad isn't going to pick my ass up.
Right.
You know what I mean? Like,
100%.
You need to know your own circumstance and what is the degree of risk you can live with, and what is the degree of safety you need to take a risk.
Right. Well, once you're in a relationship with another person, what they want to do and their contribution to the overall family finances. And yeah, for sure.
So there were a lot of conversations, because as I said, my husband's a teacher, a public school teacher, and anybody who's listening knows that's not like, we're not rolling in the big bucks on that one. Although,
but you got the pension.
Oh, and he's like, for him, another reason I knew in my certainty that it was for me to move on is he is in his right work.
Okay.
He is in his right work. He never felt that way about going back at the end of August. He loves it.
Yeah.
So I was like, wow, his experience is not my experience. I maybe should think about that, So, but there were lots of conversations, like, how can we, I got a few clients before I did the coach training while I was still working in the schools, and I got a few clients before I left.
Okay.
So that I knew I could. So that I was like, at least I had enough, like, okay, somebody can pay me for this.
Well, was there much of a shift from like the counseling therapist at a school to being a professional coach? Was that like
I was so naive, Chris.
Yeah.
Like,
that feels like separate things.
Well, no, the professional skill set was a smooth next iteration. That was fine. It was working with people, helping them create new opportunities, new possibilities, helping them, see what their obstacles, roadblocks, blind spots are. All of that felt like relatively like a natural segue of my skills, which is partially why I chose it to go for. I didn't want to do as much trauma.
Yeah.
2 kids.
Well, I imagine it's a bit more positive too, talking to. I'm just making sure. Well, it looks like we're still recording.
Okay, great.
This is sort of an experiment. I'm using like different software, but anyway.
Yeah, that's great. that is good. What if we had this whole conversation? It was up. We would have tried.
I'd be really bummed out, to be honest, but anyway.
I would too. So
at least you're talking to people that have careers now, which is a little different than the trauma cases.
Yeah, totally. I mean, but you know what? So many people have had trauma in their past. So like things, there's a gray area. Like things come up for sure. But what was the big? So I wove a bit of my net. You know what I mean? I had some, and we had a financial cushion, and that was important for me. And I was so naive, and I don't know if other people who've gone solo or entrepreneurs or solopreneurs or whatever you want to call it, I'm sort of like I don't know what I call myself. I guess I'm an entrepreneur, but I also think of myself as like an independent consultant or professional coach, I just had I didn't think that I actually would have to run a business. Like I didn't think of that. I don't know how, here I am with a master's degree and like, prestigious degrees. And I was like, oh yeah, I'll just like hang up my, metaphorical shingle. And
because I have the business degree and I'm like, I just am imagining all the tax write-offs one's going to get once they leave. That's the first thing I think, oh yeah, this, that, the other is a write-off.
Oh my gosh.
I'm very...
right, yeah, that's the logistical piece, right?
It says the marketing
didn't even occur to me.
Yeah,
None of that occurred to me. Taxes didn't, it was like, so on the one hand, I'm glad I didn't know what I didn't know because I'm not sure I would have taken the leap. On the other hand, like for those who are wondering about this, there's something amazing about trusting your instincts and like following, it sounds cheesy, but like following your heart or following what you feel inspired to pursue.
How long did it take?
Do it and feel like safe enough to do it.
How long did it take for you to feel a bit more of the safety and not the, oh my gosh, what did I do? Was this the right decision?
Like years.
Yeah.
Quite frankly.
Honestly,
years.
yeah. It would for me. I saw it 6 months at a minimum.
Yeah. I'm at 4.5 years or so now. And I would say this like year 3 to year 4 was where I finally felt like, okay, this is like, this is happening. This is working, Now I did check in with myself and my husband like many times in those first years around like, is this worth it? Was this the best decision? I knew that I could always go back. I left with not to that school per se, but like to that career. I left in good relationship with folk. Yeah, for sure. That also provides a degree of security, right? Like I had established myself enough that I knew I could return to something if I needed to. But I would say those first 2 to 3 years, I would say 2 to 3 years. It got progressively better in terms of my sense of certainty or confidence or clarity, but that I got blown around in the trees and the willows a little bit of the weeds, like what do I really want to do? What's my brand? What's my mission? What's my vision? How do you market? How do you blah, 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 blah. Your stuff.
My stuff. Yeah. I know. We just had lunch before this and Sage was like, oh my gosh, you're a marketing guy. Everything you love to do, I hate to do. I'm like,
just give me the people.
I'm just like, Instagram posts. But as far as like that definition of success, I'll call it, or, your feeling of certainty, was it tied a lot? How tied was it to the monetary side of the business? Like, was it important that the money was coming in, or was it more about, am I really finding the right people? Am I causing impact? Was it kind of like a blend of the two?
That's good, yeah. It's a huge question to ask about our definition of success, right? We could do a whole show just on our definition of success. And I think it's really individual, but I think societally we're taught, at least here in the West, I'll be clear, because this isn't the case in all cultures, but that there is that money has a relationship to value, so we're conditioned that way, so it's hard to have it not be a part of it at all. I also said that my husband's a teacher, so for me, money has always been a part of my feeling of success around it. It had to be.
Well, it was your contribution to the family.
It was a necessity for us. However, they correlated because the more money I make, the more people I'm helping and supporting. And so because that's the model of my business is to, work with individuals, teams, and groups, like the more that I earn, it ties directly to how I make an impact. And so for me, making an impact it's essential. Like I don't know where that comes. I know that it was a value that was taught from my parents, but it also is one that I myself, of my 3 siblings, really really adopted deeply. And I don't mean that in some like, oh, I'm such a do-gooder, like I'm a hot mess like most people, but I have a real desire to like have left something behind that is good.
Yeah, to get up and cause positive impact every day of the week. I mean, like...
Or at least most of the time.
Most of the time.
Every day of the week.
Take a break on Sundays.
Yeah. So it was both for me, right? Like that the work be, financially generative and positive. And, who I really love to serve are those who also want to go make an impact. So like, it's so exciting to me to work with leaders who have some positive impact or mission-driven component of who they are, even if they're just burgeoning leaders and they have a hard time even thinking of themselves as leaders, but there's some way that they want to tie who they are and what they do
a bit where they're going
to service in some way, then that's who I want to see come alive, right? Like if I can help that person, like your wife running a nonprofit, like if I can help her see how profoundly influential, and I believe she is, that like she like has people want to follow her, like people are drawn to her energy. I mean, she just invited me to go see a movie and I looked at the invitation, there's like 52 women invited to this girls' night out for
that's what she does. I know, right?
The new RPG movie, the new movie. And I was like, how does she even know like 52 women to go see this movie? And so like if I can help somebody like that multiply their understanding of who they are, then their impact just goes, right?
Yeah, there's that trickle down effect.
Yeah,
of course. And so pivoting a bit, I mean, you kind of done the therapy and the coaching business, and now you've written a book and started a podcast. So at what point did you say, you know what, I'm going to write a book or I'm going to start a podcast? Did those happen kind of in parallel, or did one beget the other?
No, but this is the answer to this is I just keep trying things.
Well,
I mean, there you go. Like literally for the title of your show, this is an example of that.
That's why I'm like, you're trying all the things that I want to be trying, but you've already done it.
Right.
This is really all about me because I want to be doing these sorts of things, and I'm trying to pull the blueprint out here that's going to work for me.
Well, I love language is my zone. Like language is totally what comes naturally to me.
Language, you mean like conversation, not
writing,
like learning
words.
Swahili. Okay.
Yeah, no, but even learning other languages. Like I love learning. I can sing you a little song in Swahili. Kenya was where I went after college. But I just love that language is a pathway to connection and communication and right? It's like an access point. So I started by doing what I was told I should do, which is write newsletters. Like every week, get people who are interested in what you have to say, have them on an email list, and then write to them and tell them some things, So then I did that I still do that. I've done that consistently for all the years. And then I was like, oh, video is the thing people said. So I love talking to people. Actually, talking to people seems even easier than writing. So let me just try some videos out and see how that goes,
Yeah.
And then I was like, I've always wanted to write a book. I mean, what happened was I started writing those newsletters where people liked them.
Yeah.
And I was like, gosh, that was so easy for me. I mean, that sounds maybe obnoxious. There's lots of things that would not be easy for me, but writing was easy.
You had a lot to say and you sat down and just flowed.
Boom, it's like not a problem.
Sure.
I can knock out a newsletter in 40 minutes.
Yeah.
I started getting feedback that oh, that's not, for most people that take, my husband would be like, can you help me with a letter of recommendation? And I would watch him science teacher man, struggle over that. I'm like, just give me that thing. Let me help you write that. It'll be done in 4 minutes and we can watch our show or whatever,
Yeah.
So that's where the book was what if I collected all of this and I had this dream, oh my gosh, I could write a book. I love books. I love to read. So I decided to go for it. Again, an adventure. I hired somebody who knew how to help me do that and get started.
So what would be the elevator pitch for the book for anybody listening right now? What would you take away from the book if you were to describe it in 2 sentences?
Great. Anybody who wants to have better relationships in their lives should read this book.
Okay. And what's the title?
It's called Naked Communication.
Naked Communication.
It's called Naked Communication. Oh my gosh, what's the tagline? This is hilarious.
By Hobbs.
By C.H.B. Hobbs.
Oh, look it up right now.
Courageously create the relationships you really want.
Okay.
And so interpersonal relationships, any kind of relationship, strangers on the street, my kids will tell you I talk to anybody, but it really
you're talking to me right now.
Yeah.
Case in point. I was looking for, where is the book?
There's the book.
There you are. Okay, we're on the website right now.
Does it say the title?
Want to create extraordinary relationships.
Want to create,
Solve conflicts with confidence and compassion, create connections with greater ease.
There you go. Self-confidence with, whatever I wrote there. That's what it's about, Chris.
Very cool. Very cool.
But it really is if you have any desire to up-level your ability to have extraordinary relationships as you walk through your day, like it's a book for that. So I wrote the book. It was fun, big book party, big launch, the whole fun shebang-a-wang. And then again, marketing is always like my weak link. But the book continues to be out there and selling, and that's been really fun. But from that, I was like, well, where do you go from there? And then I had like a mentor who was podcasting, and I was like, oh, that would be even easier and more fun for me. I mean, I just get to ask people awesome questions.
And you just get to talk. That's kind of what's fun about it, which you love anyway.
I love it. And I have a way, like my husband will tell you, and my friends, like, people just tell me things. It's like, it's actually like weird. You have to like, if I don't want that to happen to myself, I have to put on like earphones on the plane and stuff. Like, people will just tell me things.
It's as if you're a therapist or something.
So it felt like, oh wow, this is cool. I can take naked communication and then I'll make it naked conversations for the show, and I'll just like extrapolate interesting stories from women who have something to share, and then we can all know that we're not alone, and we can be inspired by each other, and we can see our own camaraderie and of courage as we're trying to try things out in the world, know. And then it's so I'm there's 53 episodes or something now, and it's sort of getting narrower. It's still amazing interviews with women and some solo shows with me about things I'm learning or trying. But then it's like getting even more clear that it's like around women having a voice and being leaders in
Is it all women?
Sector.
It's all women.
All women. It's only been
but
women.
the book, would you say the book, it obviously leans women, but would you say it's more for everybody?
Well, I would say for sure men should be reading it. Based on all the women I work with, they would really appreciate all male listeners to pick up the book as well. Yeah. When you're reading it, it might have a tone that is if like that the audience member is a woman, because it's sort of my tone, my voice. But it was when I did the book launch party, it was at a restaurant here in town, and the sound guy and the bartenders at the event waited till everybody had left and like all the signing line had died down, and then they like very sweetly came up to me. They were probably like, they were super hip, like millennial types. They're like, hey, Sage. I didn't know them before the night, but they had seen me talk and they'd been working the event, and they're like, could we get a copy of your book? Like, and I was like, yes.
You're like slipping it under the table.
Totally,
like, don't tell anybody.
And then they were like, I really think my girlfriend would appreciate it,
Yeah.
And I said, awesome.
Oh, that's cool. That's really cool.
It's not, it's universal.
Yeah. That's awesome though. Oh my gosh. I'm trying to think of any other questions I wanted to ask you. I mean, you're about 5 years into your solo gig at this point. So here's a question that I kind of start ending with most of my guests. It's like, what comes next? Like, what's the next thing you're going to try to do? You've done the podcast, you've done a book, you're going to write another book. What would success look like? What do you want to do over the next 5 years?
Those are like 7 questions.
Yeah,
Chris.
I know.
Okay.
I like to do that because then you can choose 1 or 2, or you can combine them.
Choose your own adventure.
Pretty much.
I want to. I do think I want to try and expand my podcast to have, like every woman and girl who has access to the internet have access to this kind of connection and inspiration. So that would be a fun thing for me to explore. Like, what would it take to like blow it out of the
Okay, so
park?
if there was one episode for people that have never met you, and maybe they're not even female, if there's one episode people should check out.
We should, let's say Natasha's.
Natasha's, okay.
How you
Natasha's
work full time in a big company, have 3 children, and started a nonprofit.
There you go,
But
episode
honestly,
51.
the topics are really clear. Like if you go and check out it on iTunes or whatever, like there's ones that are about yoga and activism. There's ones that are around surviving domestic violence. Like there's something there for everyone, all with a through line.
Right. Yeah, the full gamut.
So I guess I'd want to try that, and then. I'm going back into, full circles. We talked about that, how you sort of circle back around something, but in a different place. Like I want to try doing more work inside of school systems again, all the way back, but in a leadership coaching capacity. And that's what I've been exploring lately.
So you'd come in kind of as a third party sort of person to say, hey, here's how it could be working better. You wouldn't be an employee of the school district, would you?
Correct, right.
Yeah.
No, I would work with educational leaders and mission-driven company leaders, both, around this idea that they can lead more effectively if they have connection as the forefront of their goals. And I just don't think that they usually do. I think we're really task oriented in how we lead a lot of times. And so
what are a couple of the tactical things that you would tell them to do? Like if there were a couple of things you should be doing this and this, and you're probably not. Is it more the listening?
No, there's two. Listen.
Okay.
So there's three. Slow down so that you can listen. It's like, if it's like a bullet and then a sub bullet, right? You've got to actually stop moving like you're on a mission everywhere you go, and people can't approach somebody like that if you're running through the hallways or you're running through the gathering places of your organization. So pause, slow down enough to actually hear what people are trying to tell you and listen. That's the first. The second is appreciation. We do not acknowledge and appreciate the people who work with us and for us in meaningful ways most of the time. To actually say, I really appreciated the way that you did A, B, or C. That made my day so much easier. That made that project move forward so much more effectively. That brought such a great perspective to our conversation. So the specificity of the acknowledgement is like literally life altering in terms of the dynamic of the relationship and how people will work for you. If you're in a position of leadership, if people feel appreciated by you, that what they are doing, you have seen, noticed, and acknowledged, they will want to serve for you.
And I feel like that's been proven time and time.
Oh my gosh.
And
but
people just
don't do
forget
it.
about it. No.
Or they don't know how. They haven't actually tried it out. Like, let's role play. Like, okay, we were in this meeting. Like, what did Bob do or say? Like, that you could then go back to Bob and thank him for. I mean, there's actually like a learning piece here.
Totally, because we're so akin to like look at what went wrong, what could be fixed, what could be altered, and you're kind of focusing on the negative and what I can impact versus I really love what you did. Like, thank you. You're right.
So listen, appreciate, and then I guess I'll add a third, which is there's so many, but the one that's coming to me right now is like be curious. So like, be curious, like how else could I see this? So I believe that either everybody's right or nobody is, which people are always like, what? I'm like, let me say that again. Either everybody's right or nobody is, because most of the time it's interpretation. It's like, but we don't think it that way. We think it is, we're right, clearly, So this like last piece around leadership and curiosity is like, okay, well, how may they have seen that? Why did that go sideways? Why did that meeting derail? Why did, that teacher not take my feedback? Like, well, how else might they have interpreted that? What else could be true or right here? So those are my three.
That's awesome. I love it. Gosh, I guess we could be done, but when I watched Weird Al get interviewed by Dan Rather, what a great ending, right? Dan Rather goes, so Weird Al, is there anything that you think that I should have asked you that I forgot to? So maybe I'll end with that. Is there anything that you want to conclude with that I forgot to mention?
Oh, that's so good, Chris. Okay.
I just wanted to bring Weird Al in.
I know, really. That's
one of my heroes.
Good one. These people don't know what I look like, so Weird Al, Weird Sage. No, you know what? I guess what I just want to say, one thing I love to I've asked people myself is like, what would you tell somebody who is listening and maybe is considering trying something? And I think what I would just want to leave with is it's always worth it for me, it's always worth it to live a more alive life. Like a life that has more vitality, self-expression, energy. It's worth doing some trying,
taking some risks.
So I guess that's what I'd like to say, like to my younger, more anxious, nervous, worried self. It's okay to try and see how it goes.
And it's okay to fail.
And to not be perfect. So
awesome, Sage. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
This was fun.
So there you have it. Listen, be appreciative, be curious, and take some calculated risks to lead a fulfilling life. I'd like to thank Sage so much for coming on the show. And just as a reminder, you can learn more at sagebhobbs.com, and I will link off to Sage's book in the show notes. Thanks so much, y'all. Until next time, have a great January. Later. Thanks so much for your time today. I genuinely appreciate it and hope today's episode was valuable. Also, Julius would like me to remind you to rate our podcast on iTunes, leave comments on the website, and share your favorite episodes with a friend. And if you'd like to learn more, just visit trythepodcast.com, or you can shoot me a note by looking for the Contact Us section on the website. Life's pretty awesome. You just gotta try. I'll see you next time.